A stone tool tells a story of connection across impossible distances. This video explores how ancient artifacts suggest links between distant prehistoric cultures, revealing a hidden network of human interaction long before written history. By the end, you will see our entire understanding of a lonely prehistoric world completely transformed. We will examine why nearly identical carvings of a female form appeared simultaneously across Europe and Asia, and how massive stone structures on separate continents share the same celestial alignments. These objects challenge everything we thought we knew about isolated ancient societies. What does it mean for our shared human story if our ancestors were talking to each other across thousands of miles? Archaeologists face a constant puzzle, sifting through silent stones and faded bones to ask a profound question. When two cultures separated by thousands of miles create similar things, are they connected, or did they simply have the same great idea? Defining a real prehistoric connection means looking beyond basic trade goods. It involves uncovering shared technologies that are too specific, symbolic art with matching intricate details, or cultural practices so complex and unique that their simultaneous invention seems wildly improbable. The distinction often boils down to a fundamental debate between diffusionism, the idea that cultural traits spread from a single source, and the concept of independent development, where separate societies innovate on their own. This theoretical framework is the lens through which every mysterious artifact is viewed, and it dramatically shapes the stories we tell about our past. Proving a connection across vast, empty spaces with only fragments of evidence is incredibly difficult. Consider the controversial theory that some early Americans might have had European roots based on similarities in stone tool technology. This idea, known as the Solutrean hypothesis, is hotly debated precisely because the evidence is so sparse and open to interpretation. The challenge is immense. How do you map a conversation that left no written words, only a handful of strangely similar objects scattered like breadcrumbs across a continent? To even begin, we need a solid foundation in how these links are identified, a set of rules for this ancient detective work. This methodological groundwork is what allows us to confidently examine the first and perhaps most captivating category of artifacts that whisper of these deep, ancient relationships. From the abstract debate over connections, we turn to something tangible, something you could hold in your hand. Carved from stone, ivory, and clay, dozens of small female figurines have been unearthed from the frosty soils of Siberia to the river valleys of Western Europe. They are collectively known as the Venus figurines, and they all date to a remarkably narrow window of time, around 30,000 years ago. The most famous of these is the Venus of Willendorf, discovered in Austria. But she is not alone. Her likeness in spirit and form appears repeatedly across a continent. These figures share a striking set of characteristics. They almost universally depict women with exaggerated breasts, bellies, and hips, while their faces remain eerily blank, devoid of any identifying features. Their hands and feet are often minimized or missing entirely. Even more compelling, the techniques used to create them, the way the stone was pecked and abraded, show a remarkable consistency from one distant workshop to another. So what are we to make of this ancient chorus of identical forms? The central mystery is this: did a single idea, a specific cultural concept of a powerful female form, travel with groups of early humans across the vast landscapes of prehistoric Eurasia? Or did different groups, facing the same brutal Ice Age environment, and the same fundamental challenges of survival independently arrive at the same artistic solution. Some paleoanthropologists argue for diffusion. They suggest these figurines are evidence of a shared belief system, perhaps a mother goddess or a symbol of fertility that was so vital to survival that it spread with the people who held it sacred. The consistency in style, they say, is too specific to be a coincidence. Others propose a theory of parallel development. They point out that in a world where survival depended on successful childbirth and ample food, the visual celebration of nourishment and reproduction was a logical, almost inevitable, artistic outcome for any society. The shared environmental pressures of the Ice Age could have sculpted their art as surely as it sculpted the land. These small statues may be silent on the details, but they speak volumes about the priorities of our ancestors. They hint at a world where the mysteries of life, birth, and sustenance were central to human understanding. The widespread presence of these figures forces us to consider that even 30,000 years ago, ideas could travel, or that the human mind, when faced with universal struggles, can arrive at universally similar symbols. This pattern of distant similarities does not end with small carvings, however. The same questions of connection emerge on a much larger scale. From the intimate scale of handheld figurines, these questions of connection explode into a landscape of monumental stone. Across continents and millennia, our ancestors felt compelled to move mountains, or at least massive rocks. In the rolling green hills of southern England stands Stonehenge, its iconic trilithons reaching for the sky. But travel over 4,000 miles to the savannah of West Africa, and you will find the Senegambian stone circles, over 1,000 monuments of erected laterite pillars arranged in perfect circles. Journey further to southern India, and you will encounter massive dolmens, great capstones balanced on upright stones, marking ancient burials. The sheer geographical distance between these sites is staggering. Yet, when you look closer, the architectural parallels become almost unnerving. All of these structures demonstrate a profound interest in celestial alignment. Stonehenge is famously oriented to the solstice sun. The Senegambian circles are arranged with precise geometric patterns that likely held astronomical significance. Many Indian dolmens are positioned to capture the first light of the equinox. The construction techniques, too, show a shared ingenuity, a common understanding of leverage, weight, and balance to manipulate stones that often weigh several tons. And their purposes seem to intersect at the most fundamental human concerns: burial, ritual, and marking humanity's place within the cosmos. So, did a single, globe-trotting culture of megalithic engineers spread this knowledge? Or did different societies, grappling with the same spiritual questions about death and the stars, independently arrive at the same monumental solution? For a long time, the prevailing theory was diffusion. The idea was that this sophisticated knowledge of stonework and astronomy originated in one place, perhaps the Near East, and slowly spread westward into Europe, carried by migrating peoples. This seemed to neatly explain the similarities, but then the dating evidence began to tell a different story. Recent archaeological work using advanced scientific techniques has revealed a shocking timeline. Some of the oldest megalithic structures are not in the supposed birthplace of the tradition. The earliest dolmens in India, for instance, and the astonishingly ancient stone circles of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey predate even the earliest phases of Stonehenge by thousands of years. This turns the old diffusion model on its head. How could knowledge diffuse from a center if the so-called outliers are actually older? This suggests something even more profound than a single spreading culture. It points to the possibility of multiple, independent springs of the same monumental idea. Perhaps the impulse to build in stone on a grand scale is a fundamental part of the human toolkit, emerging at different times, in different places, whenever a society reached a certain level of social organization and cosmological curiosity. They were not necessarily copying each other, but rather responding to a shared human need to create a permanent mark on the world, to build a bridge between the earth and the heavens. The stones themselves may be silent, but their collective presence across the globe speaks to a unified human desire to reach for something greater than ourselves. And if our ancestors were building the same kinds of monuments worlds apart, what other shared ideas were taking root in the ancient human mind? While the silent stones of megaliths speak to a shared human spirit, another kind of artifact provides direct and undeniable proof of connection. This evidence comes not from grand monuments, but from tiny, razor-sharp flakes of volcanic glass known as obsidian. To the naked eye, one piece of obsidian looks much like another, a shiny black fragment. But to an archaeologist with the right tools, each piece holds a hidden passport, a unique chemical signature that reveals its precise origin, the specific volcano it came from. This is where the story moves from speculation to stunning fact. Scientists use a technique called neutron activation analysis, where they bombard a tiny sample of the obsidian with neutrons. This causes the elements within the glass to give off a unique gamma-ray signature, a chemical fingerprint as distinctive as a barcode. By comparing this fingerprint to samples from known volcanic sources, they can pinpoint the exact mountain where the rock was born, sometimes with an accuracy down to a single flow. This scientific sleuthing has uncovered trade routes that rewrite our understanding of prehistoric mobility. In one of the most compelling cases, obsidian artifacts excavated at ancient sites in Mesopotamia, in what is now Iraq, were traced back to their source, the volcanoes of central Anatolia in modern Turkey. This was not a short trip. We are talking about a distance of over 1,000 miles as the crow flies, across rugged mountains and vast plains. Even more astonishing, this trade was happening as early as 12,000 years ago, a time when we often picture small, isolated bands of hunter-gatherers. The same pattern appears across the Mediterranean. Obsidian tools found in early Egyptian settlements, dating back 10,000 years, were chemically matched to volcanoes on the island of Milos, far out in the Aegean Sea. This meant that people were making deliberate, dangerous sea voyages to acquire this prized material, long before the invention of the sail. So what does this tell us? This was not casual local exchange. This was a sophisticated, organized economic system. Obsidian was the super material of the Stone Age, capable of holding an edge sharper than modern surgical steel. It was incredibly valuable. The fact that it was traveling such immense distances tells us that these cultures were not separate at all. They were linked by a web of economic relationships. Someone had to know where to find the best glass. Someone else had to organize the mining or collection of it. Then, traders had to carry it, either on long overland treks or in boats across open water, passing it from hand to hand, from community to community, until it reached a craftsman 1,000 miles from its origin. This implies social organization, negotiated safe passage, and a shared understanding of value. These invisible highways, mapped by the chemical ghosts within volcanic glass, reveal a prehistoric world that was already deeply interconnected. Long before empires or written contracts, our ancestors were building networks of trade and trust that spanned continents, proving that the human impulse to connect and exchange is as ancient as humanity itself. And if they were trading raw materials so extensively, is it such a leap to think they were also trading something even more powerful, ideas? These fragile, fired clay pots tell a story of a world awakening to a new technology at nearly the same moment. As human societies transitioned from hunting and gathering to farming during the Neolithic period, a remarkable pattern emerged. In the humid forests of ancient Japan, the Jomon people were creating some of the world's oldest pottery, characterized by its distinctive cord-marked surfaces built up with coiled clay ropes. At roughly the same time, thousands of miles away, potters in the Sahara Desert of North Africa were also producing vessels. Even more astonishing, across the vast Pacific in South America, early communities along the coast were independently shaping their own ceramic containers. The parallels are not just in the idea of making pots, but in the specific techniques. The Jamon's signature cord marking, where they pressed twisted ropes into the wet clay to create intricate, textured patterns, finds a strange echo in the decorative impressions found on early African and South American wares. How could such a specific artistic style appear simultaneously on opposite sides of the planet? The search for an answer plunges us directly into the heart of the great debate. Was this a case of pure technological convergence, where different human minds, faced with the same needs for storage and cooking, simply stumbled upon the same solutions using the materials at hand? Or does the ceramic record hint at faint, ancient pathways of contact? One theory suggests a potential connection across the Bering Land Bridge, a now submerged corridor that once linked Asia and the Americas. Could a knowledge of basic pottery making have trickled along with the first human migrations, persisting and evolving in isolated pockets? Another, more radical idea posits very early, primitive voyages across the Pacific, carrying not just people but their cultural toolkit. For a long time, the independent invention theory held the most weight. It seemed far-fetched that such fragile knowledge could survive such impossible journeys. The sheer distance and geographical barriers made diffusion seem unlikely. But then, genetics entered the conversation. Recent studies of ancient human DNA have begun to reveal a far more complex story of human migration than we once believed. They show not just one, but multiple pulses of people moving between continents, with population groups meeting, mixing, and separating over thousands of years. This new evidence does not prove that pottery styles were traded, but it fundamentally changes the landscape of the possible. It reveals that the prehistoric world was far from static. People were on the move, and with them, their ideas. The independent invention of pottery in several locations remains a strong possibility, but we can no longer dismiss the potential for cross-pollination. The clay itself is silent on the journey it may have taken, but the patterns pressed into its surface, repeated across the globe, urge us to consider a more connected ancient world. And if the very practical art of pottery might hold clues to these lost conversations, what about something far more abstract, like a shared set of symbols carved into the very bones of the earth? These shared symbols appear where we might least expect them, carved into rock walls worlds apart. Deep inside a cave in France, a visitor from 30,000 years ago painted a perfect spiral next to the image of a charging bison. On a rock shelter in Indonesia, the same spiral form curls beside a human hand stencil. And across the ocean, on a stone in the American Southwest, an ancient artist pecked an identical spiral into the desert varnish. This is not an isolated case. Zigzag lines, cross-hatching, and concentric circles appear with an unnerving consistency across every continent inhabited by early humans. The question these patterns raise is profound. Are we looking at the first global art style, or something even more fundamental, a blueprint hardwired into the human brain? Some anthropologists argue for the latter, suggesting these geometric patterns are phosphenes, visual patterns generated by the human nervous system itself. These forms can be seen during altered states of consciousness, induced by rituals, trances, or even migraines. If our shared biology produces the same internal visual library, it is no wonder that early artists from the Ice Age tundra to the tropical rainforest would all draw from it. This theory of neuroesthetics posits that the spiral is not an idea that traveled, but a vision that spontaneously emerged wherever humans existed. Yet, other evidence complicates this elegant explanation. Consider the specific way animals are depicted. The famous cave paintings of Chauvet in France feature lions and rhinos rendered with a stunning understanding of anatomy and movement, capturing a powerful, leaping posture. Now look at rock art in southern Africa. There you will find eland and other antelope depicted in a nearly identical dynamic style, frozen in a state of animated grace. This goes beyond simple biology. This is a shared artistic convention, a specific way of seeing and representing the world. Could such a specific stylistic approach really have been born twice, independently? This is where the idea of cultural transmission gains traction. We know that small, mobile bands of hunter-gatherers were capable of incredible journeys, as the Obsidian trade routes proved. These groups did not live in permanent isolation. They would have met at seasonal gathering places along migratory routes or at the borders of their territories. At these meetings, they would have exchanged more than just goods. They would have shared stories, rituals, and knowledge. A powerful symbol, like a spiral that might represent the sun, the cycle of life, or a portal to the spirit world, could have been one of the most valuable things traded. It was a compact piece of cosmology, a ready-made idea that could be adopted and adapted by a new culture. Perhaps a shaman from one group shared a vision with a shaman from another, and a symbol was passed on, slowly making its way across a continent over generations. The patterns themselves become a kind of fossilized conversation. A zigzag line might mean water to one group and a serpent to another, but the fact that the same visual vocabulary was being used suggests a deep, underlying connection in how these different peoples structured their thoughts about the universe. These are not random scratches. They are the foundational elements of a visual language, a language that seems to have been surprisingly widely spoken in the ancient world. And if our ancestors were sharing a symbolic language, what does that tell us about the most intimate and powerful artifacts they left behind, the objects they placed with their dead? Perhaps the most controversial evidence for these ancient conversations is etched not in art, but in stone tools designed for survival. The craftsmanship of a spear point tells a story of necessity, but when the same intricate design appears on opposite sides of an ocean, the story becomes a profound mystery. This is the heart of the debate surrounding the Solutrean and Clovis cultures. In southwestern Europe, from around 22,000 to 17,000 years ago, the Solutrean people were producing stunningly sophisticated stone weapons. Their signature technology was the bifacial leaf point, a large, thin, beautifully crafted spearhead shaped by carefully removing flakes from both faces of the rock. They achieved this through a method known as overshot flaking, a risky, master-level technique where a craftsman would strike the stone in such a way that a flake would travel across the entire face of the tool, thinning it dramatically and creating a characteristic scalloped edge. Now cross the Atlantic and fast forward a few thousand years. In North America, the Clovis culture emerges around 13,000 years ago, and their weapon of choice is a projectile point that is, in many ways, a mirror image of the Solutrean form. The Clovis point is also a large, bifacial spearhead, thinned using what appears to be the same complex overshot flaking technique, resulting in that same distinctive scalloped edge profile. Both cultures even created the same specialized tools for their manufacture, like cylindrical hammerstones and precise pressure flakers. The similarities are so specific, so technically nuanced, that seeing them side by side is jarring. How could two cultures, separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, develop not just the same general idea for a spear point, but the same intricate, difficult recipe for making it? One school of thought argues vehemently for independent invention. Proponents of this view point out that the timeline is problematic. There is a gap of several thousand years between the end of the Solutrean period in Europe and the first appearance of Clovis in the Americas. They argue that if Solutrean peoples had crossed the Atlantic, we would expect to find a continuous trail of archaeological sites bridging that gap, a trail that has so far proven elusive. Furthermore, they suggest that the similarities are a classic case of technological convergence. When faced with the same challenge of hunting large, thick-skinned game like mammoths, the most logical solution for any skilled stoneworker is to create a large, sturdy, sharp point. The overshot flaking technique, while advanced, might simply be the most efficient way to thin a large piece of stone, discovered independently by both cultures. The opposing argument, however, finds the parallels too precise to dismiss. Could the same exact solution for thinning a point, with all its inherent risks and required skill, really be stumbled upon by chance twice? Some archaeologists point to geological evidence suggesting that during the last ice age, the northern Atlantic was a frozen landscape of ice shelves and glaciers, creating a possible, though brutally difficult, coastal route from Europe to North America. They propose that small groups of Solutrean hunter-gatherers following seals and other marine resources could have island-hopped across this icy bridge, bringing their distinctive tool-making traditions with them. The debate is far from settled, and it forces us to confront the limits of our evidence. Are we looking at the ghost of a migration, a faint cultural echo carried by a handful of intrepid explorers? Or are we witnessing the awesome power of the human mind to arrive at identical, brilliant solutions when faced with identical problems, a testament to our shared ingenuity? These stone points, lying in museums an ocean apart, are a silent challenge. They ask us to decide just how connected or how independently brilliant our ancient ancestors truly were. The silent language of stone tools and painted symbols finds an even more personal expression in the smallest of artifacts. Tucked away in archaeological sites from the coasts of South Africa to the islands of Indonesia and across the vast interior of Asia lie tiny, perforated shells. These are not random debris. They are beads carefully selected, meticulously drilled, and often polished to a shine from long use. Some of these ornaments date back an astonishing 40,000 years, making them among the oldest known forms of personal adornment. What is truly captivating is not just their age, but their consistency. Across continents, our ancestors were drawn to the same types of shells, particularly those from the genus Nassarius, small, glossy marine snails. They employed the same technique to modify them, using a sharp stone point to bore a single, precise hole through the back of the shell. And on many of these beads, microscopes reveal identical patterns of wear, a polish and smoothing along the edges of the hole and on the shell's surface, evidence that they were strung together and worn against skin or clothing for a very long time. This isn't just a case of different people having the same simple idea. This is a shared cultural recipe for beauty, repeated across the globe. Why would a culture in North Africa and another in the Levant and another in Australia all go through the exact same multi-step process to turn the same kind of seashell into an almost identical necklace? The recent discovery of shell beads in a cave in Morocco provides a stunning clue. These beads, dated to around 150,000 years ago, are made from a species of sea snail and are perforated in the same way as beads found thousands of miles away in South Africa, which are only 80,000 years old, and others from the Levant that are even younger. The Moroccan beads are the oldest known, suggesting this tradition may have originated in Africa and then, somehow, traveled with human populations as they moved across the world. This implies that the idea of making these specific ornaments was not independently invented dozens of times, but was a piece of cultural knowledge carried from one generation to the next, spreading over immense distances and tens of thousands of years. So what does this mean? A bead is more than just decoration. It is a powerful signal. When you wear one, you are communicating. You might be signaling your membership in a group, your status, or a connection to a specific place or belief. The global distribution of nearly identical beads suggests that the need for this kind of social signaling is a deep-rooted, fundamental human behavior. It points to the possibility of shared aesthetic values, a common understanding of what was considered beautiful or meaningful that may have helped distant groups recognize a shared humanity when they met. These tiny shells tell a story not of isolated tribes, but of a world where the most personal forms of expression, the things people wore on their very bodies, were part of a vast, ancient conversation about who we are. And if the desire to adorn ourselves connects us across continents, what about the stories we told to explain the world around us? The humble seed carries within it the story of a revolution that reshaped the human world. When we trace the spread of agriculture, we are not just following the movement of plants, but the flow of an idea, a technology so powerful it could bridge vast cultural divides. Beginning around 12,000 years ago in the Fertile Crescent, a region of the Middle East, groups of people began a grand experiment, deliberately planting and tending to the ancestors of wheat, barley, and lentils. This was not a slow, localized process. Within just a few thousand years, the tools, techniques, and crops of farming appeared with startling speed across Europe, reaching the Atlantic coast. How did this happen so quickly? The great archaeological debate centers on a fundamental question. Did farming spread because the farmers themselves moved, migrating en masse and bringing their seeds with them, gradually replacing the local hunter-gatherer populations? Or did the idea of farming travel on its own, adopted by indigenous peoples who saw its advantages and integrated it into their own way of life? For decades, the evidence seemed to point to a wave of advance, a slow but steady expansion of farming peoples. But then, genetics entered the field. Analysis of ancient DNA from human remains across Europe reveals a far more complex and interesting story. It shows that the spread of agriculture was a mixture of both movement and adoption. In some areas, migrating farmers did bring their crops and their genes. In many other places, however, local hunter-gatherer communities learned the new technology from their neighbors and chose to adopt it, blending their own traditions with this revolutionary new lifestyle. This was not a simple replacement, it was a conversation. The knowledge of how to domesticate, when to plant, and how to store surplus was valuable information, and it moved along the same kind of social networks that traded obsidian and shell beads thousands of years earlier. This pattern of shared agricultural knowledge becomes even more intriguing when we look at a global scale. Consider the parallel stories of the bottle gourd and the squash. In Asia and Africa, the bottle gourd was one of the first domesticated plants, valued not for food but for its hard shell, which made a perfect container, a canteen, or a bowl. At roughly the same time, in the Americas, ancient societies were domesticating squashes and gourds for the very same purposes. These plants are from completely different biological families, separated by oceans. Yet, different cultures on opposite sides of the world identified the same solution to a common human need, a durable, lightweight container, and they independently directed the process of domestication toward that same goal. This is a powerful argument for the independent genius of humanity. But recent genetic detective work on specific crops adds another layer of mystery. Scientists tracing the ancestry of barley, a staple crop of the Old World, have found that ancient varieties grown in Tibet contain genetic markers from two different wild populations, one from the Middle East and one from East Asia. This suggests that these two strains of barley from distant parts of the world were brought together by human hands either through trade or migration and intentionally crossbred thousands of years ago. This is more than just the spread of a crop. It is evidence of a sophisticated exchange of agricultural science. Someone had to carry that barley across towering mountain ranges. Someone else had to understand that combining the two strains could create a hardier plant. The agricultural revolution, therefore, opens a window onto a world where the most vital technologies were not hoarded but shared. The knowledge of how to turn a wild grass into a reliable food source was arguably the most valuable asset a prehistoric culture could possess. And the fact that it moved so readily across continents tells us that our ancestors were not just connected by trade, but by a shared investment in a common future. The same ancient seas that once divided continents may have been our first highways. To truly grasp the scale of prehistoric connection, we must look past the land and toward the ocean, reassessing what we know about the very first sailors. The peopling of Australia stands as one of humanity's greatest early adventures. Around 65,000 years ago, people arrived on that continent. This was not a casual coastal stroll. Even at the lowest sea levels of the last ice age, reaching Australia required a significant sea crossing, a voyage of at least 60 miles across the open water of the Timor Sea. These were not people accidentally drifting on a log. This was a deliberate, planned expedition, requiring the construction of some form of watercraft and a sophisticated understanding of navigation. They had to read the currents, the winds, and the stars. They had to carry fresh water and supplies for a journey that would have taken days. This achievement, deep in our shared past, shatters the image of the timid, landlocked caveman. It reveals our ancestors as intrepid mariners from the very beginning. This pattern of astonishing sea voyages repeats itself across the globe and throughout time. Thousands of years later, around 10,000 years ago, we see evidence of people colonizing islands in the Mediterranean like Cyprus and Crete. These were not visible from the mainland. Reaching them meant sailing out of sight of land, into the open blue, guided only by a deep knowledge of the sea and the sky. The boats that made these journeys have almost entirely vanished, rotted away by time. But their ghostly impression remains in the colonization patterns themselves, a silent testament to their success. So if our ancestors were capable of such feats of navigation tens of thousands of years ago, could they have accomplished even more? Could some have ventured across entire oceans? This question brings us to two of archaeology's most tantalizing puzzles. The first involves the sweet potato. This starchy tuber is native to the Americas. It was a cornerstone of diets from North to South America for millennia. Yet, centuries before European contact, the sweet potato was also present in Polynesia. It was not just known, it was an established crop with its own Polynesian name, kumara, a word strikingly similar to its name in some Andean languages. How did an American plant find its way across the vast Pacific Ocean? The second puzzle involves the chicken. We know that chickens were first domesticated in Southeast Asia. But archaeologists working in Chile have uncovered chicken bones at a site called El Arenal, dating to a time before any Spanish arrival. Genetic analysis suggested these ancient Chilean chickens were related to Polynesian varieties. Here was the stunning possibility that Polynesian sailors, the greatest navigators the ancient world ever knew, had not only reached South America, but had established enough contact to leave behind their animals. Both of these findings have been fiercely debated. Subsequent research has questioned the dating of the Chilean chicken bones and the strength of the genetic link. The sweet potato's journey could be explained by a single, storm-blown Polynesian canoe accidentally reaching the American coast and returning home with a precious cargo of tubers. Yet, even with these questions, the evidence is provocative. It forces us to consider that the prehistoric map was not filled with impenetrable blue barriers. The oceans were dynamic spaces, traversed by people whose maritime technology and courage we are only beginning to appreciate. These were not isolated incidents, but the logical extension of a seafaring tradition that began with the first journey to Australia. The achievements of these ancient mariners suggest a world where the sea was a connector, not a divider, opening up the very real possibility that the first transoceanic contacts happened not in 1492, but thousands of years earlier, woven into the very fabric of prehistory. Long before the first written word, our ancestors were filling the air with music. Deep inside a cave in southwestern Germany, archaeologists discovered some of the oldest known musical instruments in the world, flutes carved from the bones of griffon vultures and mammoth ivory. These flutes are around 40,000 years old, and they are not crude noisemakers. They are sophisticated technology with carefully carved finger holes placed to produce a specific, harmonious scale. Now consider a similar discovery made in Jiahu, China, a site thousands of miles away and thousands of years younger. There, flutes made from the wing bones of red-crowned cranes were found, and they share a startling design feature. Both the German and Chinese flutes were engineered to produce a pentatonic scale, the same 5-note scale that forms the foundation of many musical traditions around the world today. How could two cultures, separated by an entire continent and millennia, both invent not just the flute, but the same musical mathematics? This pattern of shared sound technology repeats itself across the globe. In Australia, indigenous cultures have used the bullroarer, a flat piece of wood tied to a string that creates a roaring, humming sound when whirled through the air for countless generations. The same instrument appears in the ancient rituals of cultures across Africa, Europe, and the Americas. Then there are lithophones or rock gongs, stones selected for their specific tonal properties and struck to create melodies. These have been found from the valleys of India to the plains of North America. The manufacturing techniques show a consistent, deep understanding of acoustics. A bone flute cannot have random holes. The placement must be precise, calculated through trial and error to create a desired pitch. A bullroarer's sound is determined by its shape, weight, and the speed of its spin, principles understood by makers worlds apart. So were our first musicians all reading from the same invisible sheet of music. One compelling theory is that we are wired for these specific sounds. The pentatonic scale is mathematically inherent in the physics of sound, a natural harmonic series that our brains are predisposed to find pleasing. The bullroarer produces a sound that mimics powerful natural phenomena, like thunder or the roar of a large animal, which might have held a universal symbolic power. In this view, these instruments represent independent discoveries of the same acoustic truths, a universal human response to the physics of vibration. Yet, the sheer specificity is difficult to ignore. Could the precise knowledge of how to tune a bone flute by carving its holes at exact intervals really have been discovered independently over and over? The recent discoveries of these ancient flutes suggest another possibility, that the technology of music, like the technology of tool-making, was a form of knowledge that could travel. A musical tradition is more than just entertainment. It is a core part of social bonding, ritual, and communication. If small, mobile bands of humans met and interacted, sharing the sounds of a flute around a campfire, that knowledge could have been one of the most precious things exchanged. The song itself might be forgotten, but the design of the instrument that played it, a blueprint for creating beauty and emotion, could have been carried across generations and continents. These ancient instruments challenge us to listen more closely to the silence of the past. They suggest that the human desire to create ordered, beautiful sound, and to use that sound to bring people together, is a fundamental part of our shared heritage. Whether through independent genius or ancient, whispered lessons, our ancestors were orchestrating a connected world long before history began to write it down. A body is laid to rest, its head carefully pointing toward the west. In its hands, a perfectly crafted stone tool, and scattered around it, a fine, red powder stains the earth. This intimate scene was repeated across the ancient world. From the sun-baked plains of Europe to the rugged coastlines of Australia and the deep forests of the Americas, our ancestors returned to the same profound rituals when facing death. They shared a seemingly universal tradition of using red ochre, a naturally occurring iron oxide pigment, to cover the bodies of their deceased. This was not a casual act. The vibrant red color, the color of blood and life, was deliberately applied tens of thousands of years ago, suggesting a shared symbolic language for the ultimate human mystery. Was this a single, ancient belief about death that traveled with the first human migrations out of Africa, carried in the minds of our earliest ancestors? Or does this point to something even deeper, a psychological convergence where every human culture, when confronted with the stillness of death, instinctively reached for the same powerful symbol of life? The parallels extend far beyond a single pigment. Consider the positioning of the body. In numerous burials spanning continents, skeletons are found in a flexed or fetal position, curled as if in sleep or ready for rebirth. Grave goods are another haunting echo. It was common to place tools, personal ornaments like shell beads, and sometimes even food alongside the deceased. This practice implies a shared concept, a belief that the person would need these items in another existence, a worldview that transcends vast geographical divides. The most compelling evidence, however, might be found in stone. The megalithic tomb, a massive stone chamber buried under an earthen mound, appears in strikingly similar forms from the Long Barrows of Britain to the corridor tombs of Ireland, and across the sea to the monumental structures of the Iberian Peninsula. This architectural tradition does not stop in Europe. It finds a powerful reflection in the horned cairns of North Africa and the vast necropolises of India. These were not simple graves, they were collective houses for the dead, engineered to last for eternity, often aligned with solar or lunar events. So, does this global tapestry of mortuary practices mean that a specific funeral rite was passed from one culture to another like a cherished recipe? Or are we witnessing the independent flowering of the same fundamental human realizations? The psychological convergence theory is powerful. All humans experience grief, loss, and a deep desire to honor those who have passed. The fetal position could symbolize a return to the womb of the earth. Providing grave goods could be a universal expression of love and care, a final provision for a journey. Red ochre, as the color of lifeblood, could be an instinctual attempt to restore vitality, a hope against the finality of death. These actions feel like natural, almost inevitable human responses. Yet, the specificity and complexity of the megalithic tombs give one pause. Constructing a stone chamber requiring precise engineering and communal labor is not an instinctual act like placing a shell bead in a hand. It is a sophisticated cultural blueprint. The recurrence of this specific blueprint across such immense distances suggests the possibility of contact, of knowledge shared along ancient trade routes or migration paths. Perhaps the concept of a permanent stone house for the ancestors was an idea so powerful that it spread, adapted by each culture that encountered it to fit their own beliefs. The silent testimony of these burials presents us with two profound possibilities. Either the human mind, when faced with mortality, is wired to arrive at the same symbolic solutions no matter where or when we live, or the prehistoric world was woven together by threads of shared belief so strong that they dictated how we treated our dead for thousands of years. The bones, the red-stained earth, and the enduring stones ask us which story we are prepared to hear. The night sky was the one shared canvas for all of humanity. Everywhere our ancestors looked up, they saw the same sun, the same moon, and the same slow dance of constellations. Yet the structures they built to watch this cosmic show reveal a depth of understanding that still feels staggering today. We have already seen how Stonehenge in England captures the solstice sun, but travel to a place called Cahokia in North America, and you will find a different structure with the same celestial purpose. Monk's Mound, the largest earthen pyramid north of Mexico, is aligned so precisely that its front plaza marks the equinox sunrise, the day when light and dark are perfectly balanced. Across the Atlantic in the Nabta Playa basin of the Sahara Desert, a circle of megaliths constructed over 7,000 years ago aligns not just with the summer solstice, but with the rising points of specific stars like Sirius. The sheer distance between these sites is immense, yet the intellectual achievement is nearly identical. Different cultures using different materials, stone in one place, earth in another, were all conducting the same sophisticated experiments in cosmic geometry. So how do we explain this global phenomenon of sky watching? One possibility is that this knowledge was discovered once by a single, forgotten culture of astronomer priests, and then carried across the world by migrating peoples. This diffusionist idea is seductive, but the timeline of these sites creates a serious problem. The African circles of Nabta Playa are older than Stonehenge by thousands of years, and the Cahokia mounds were built thousands of years after both. If this was a single tradition, its journey across the globe would be impossibly slow and disjointed. The more compelling explanation points to a universal human capacity. Every culture looking at the same sky would have noticed the same basic patterns. The sun's path shifts north and south with the seasons. The moon waxes and wanes on a reliable schedule. Certain stars, like the North Star, hold their position while others circle endlessly. The independent discovery of these cycles was almost inevitable for any society that settled down and began to track time. But then we look closer, and the similarities become eerily specific. Recent research into ancient star lore has uncovered a fascinating pattern. Cultures as distant as the Greeks, the Maya, and the Aboriginal peoples of Australia all identified the same group of stars, our constellation of Orion, as a hunter or a warrior figure. They also shared stories about a cluster of stars we call the Pleiades, often viewing them as seven sisters or a group of young women. How could the same narrative be woven around the same stars by people who supposedly never met? This is where the idea of cognitive convergence becomes so powerful. The human brain is a pattern-seeking machine. The stars of Orion form a very distinct, human-like belt and sword. The Pleiades are a tight, noticeable cluster that stands out from the surrounding stars. It is not so strange that different human minds, searching for meaning in the random scatter of the night, would connect those same dots into similar shapes and then into similar stories. The hunter, the sisters, these are fundamental human archetypes. The sky became a universal storybook, and every culture learned to read it using the same cognitive tools. Yet, the methods of tracking went beyond simple observation. Studies of cuneiform tablets from Mesopotamia and ancient codices from the Maya show that both civilizations had independently developed complex systems for predicting the movements of Venus. They both understood its cycles as both a morning and an evening star, and they both associated its appearance with omens of war and destiny. This level of precise mathematical astronomy feels too specific to be mere coincidence. It suggests that when a society reaches a certain level of intellectual curiosity and organizational complexity, turning a detailed eye to the planets is a natural progression. The heavens presented the ultimate puzzle, a clockwork of unbelievable precision. The drive to understand that mechanism, to predict its movements and find our place within it, appears to be a universal thread in the human psyche. Whether this knowledge was independently born a dozen times over, or whether the bare essentials were carried in the minds of the first humans who left Africa, the result is the same. Our ancestors were not just looking up in wonder, they were mapping, calculating, and building a relationship with the cosmos that was both deeply personal and astonishingly scientific. This shared celestial conversation, written in alignments of stone and earth, may be the most profound connection of all. A single, intricate pottery design appears like a trail of breadcrumbs across the greatest ocean on Earth. From the islands of Southeast Asia across the empty blue expanse of the Pacific, these distinctive potsherds mark the path of the Lapita people, starting around 1600 BCE. And over the next 1,000 years, they performed one of humanity's most astonishing expansions, sailing into and colonizing islands that had never before felt a human footprint. Their signature was a style of pottery stamped with intricate geometric patterns. Using a comb-like tool, they would press designs into the wet clay, creating bands of zigzags, faces, and concentric circles that are instantly recognizable to archaeologists. Finding this pottery on a beach or in a dig site is like finding a name carved on a tree, a clear declaration the Lapita were here. This ceramic trail begins in the islands near New Guinea and then leaps eastward across thousands of miles of open ocean to the far-flung islands of Vanuatu, New Caledonia, Fiji, and eventually to the distant shores of Samoa and Tonga. Each new island settlement became a stepping stone, a new home from which the next generation of explorers would set sail into the unknown. But what does this rapid, deliberate expansion tell us about their world? The Lapita were not just farmers or potters, they were master mariners. Their voyages were not accidental drifts, but intentional acts of colonization. They built large, ocean-going outrigger canoes capable of carrying dozens of people, along with their most vital cargo, food plants like taro and yam, domesticated animals like pigs and chickens, and the tools to start a new life. To navigate, they used a deep, generational knowledge of the stars, the swells of the ocean, the flight patterns of birds, and the colors of the water, reading the sea as we read a map. This was not a haphazard migration. It was a planned, systematic settlement of the last major region on Earth to be populated by humans. The archaeological record of their pottery is powerfully reinforced by another line of evidence, the languages spoken today across this vast region. Linguists have traced the family of Austronesian languages, which includes thousands of tongues from Madagascar to Easter Island, back to a common ancestral language. The spread of these languages maps almost perfectly onto the spread of Lapita pottery. This is not a coincidence. It means that as the Lapita people moved, they carried their language with them. The words they used for the sea, for the canoe, for the stars, and for their family became the foundation for new languages that evolved in isolation on far-flung islands. The pottery and the language together form a dual fingerprint, proving this was a movement of people, not just ideas. the Lapita phenomenon gives us a rare, crystal-clear model for how prehistoric cultural spread actually worked. In a world mostly devoid of such definitive evidence, the Lapita show us what is possible. They demonstrate that ancient peoples could indeed maintain a cohesive cultural identity across unimaginable distances, sharing a common artistic vision and a common tongue for over 1,000 years. Their story forces us to reconsider every other potential long-distance connection. If the Lapita could achieve this across the Pacific, what other journeys, now lost to time, might have connected other distant shores? Their legacy is a challenge, written in clay and spoken in 1,000 different voices, urging us to never underestimate the reach of our ancestors. Deep in the humid lowlands of ancient Mexico, a colossal stone head stares out from the jungle. The Olmec civilization, often called the mother culture of Mesoamerica, left behind these monumental sculptures as a testament to their power. But a persistent question haunts their origins. Were the Olmecs the sole, brilliant inventors of complex society in the region, or were they building upon ideas that traveled from even earlier cultures? This brings us to a compelling and controversial case, the potential connection between the Olmec heartland and the Maya people of the Pacific coast. The Maya, whose name means people of the corn in a later Mayan language, were among the very first in Mesoamerica to settle in villages and adopt a sedentary lifestyle, centuries before the Olmecs flourished. They were master potters, creating some of the earliest known ceramics in the region. And here is where the mystery takes shape. Archaeologists have uncovered Maya pottery that bears a striking resemblance to what would later become classic Olmec styles. We see similar forms like the teapot-shaped vessels with stirrup spouts and shared decorative techniques, including the use of iridescent specular hematite paint that gives the pottery a brilliant metallic sheen. Even their clay figurines whisper of a connection. Both cultures produced small, solid ceramic figures of women, often with similar hairstyles and body postures. The architectural plot thickens when we look at the early Maya site of Paso de la Moda, where they constructed the first known ball court in Mesoamerica, a ceremonial landscape feature that would become a cornerstone of Olmec and later Maya civilization. So, what are we to make of this? Did the Olmecs learn the arts of complex society, pottery, and even the ritual of the ball game from the Maya? The debate between scholars is a perfect microcosm of the larger conversation. On one side, some archaeologists argue for independent development. They point out that the basic technologies like pottery and village life were logical, almost inevitable steps in human cultural evolution. Different groups could have easily stumbled upon the same solutions, like using local clays and minerals to create glossy paints or shaping clay into human forms without any direct contact. The ball court, they suggest, could have arisen independently wherever a society developed team sports and public rituals. The other side, however, sees a pattern too specific to ignore. The recent discovery of unmistakably Olmec-style artifacts in Maya contexts has poured fuel on this debate. At the coastal site of El Mesac, archaeologists found carved jade celts and pottery decorated with classic Olmec motifs, like the word jaguar, a supernatural being that is a hallmark of Olmec art. These were not local imitations, but objects that chemically and stylistically originated in the Olmec heartland, hundreds of miles away. This is not just a similarity of ideas, it is the movement of objects. This evidence suggests direct contact, trade, or perhaps even a shared elite culture that connected the coastal Maya with the Gulf Coast Olmec. The Olmec-Maya connection remains one of archaeology's most tantalizing puzzles. It forces us to look at a map of ancient Mexico not as a collection of isolated culture zones, but as a dynamic network where ideas, goods, and people could flow across surprising distances. This case study shows us the very real difficulty of proving a connection with fragments of pottery and stone, but it also opens up the thrilling possibility that the first civilizations of the Americas were in conversation with each other, trading not just goods, but the very blueprint for a new way of life. Metal's story begins with fire and earth. The earliest known copper beads were hammered into shape in the Middle East over 10,000 years ago, a simple act of shaping native metal. But the true revolution came with smelting, the process of using intense heat to extract pure metal from its rocky ore. This transformative technology appears to have ignited in multiple places at once. In the Balkans, sophisticated copper smelting was underway by the 6th millennium BCE. At nearly the same time, 5,000 miles to the east, metal workers in the Indus Valley were mastering the same craft. Later, the innovation of bronze, an alloy of copper and tin that created a far stronger metal, also emerged in several centers. The ancient cultures of Mesopotamia and China both developed complex bronze industries, producing intricately cast vessels and weapons that are stunningly similar in their technical ambition, yet separated by vast, seemingly impassable mountain ranges. So, were these parallel explosions of ingenuity a case of shared knowledge, or simply the inevitable outcome of human curiosity playing with fire and rock? The answer may lie in the recipes themselves. When archaeologists analyze the chemical composition of ancient bronze artifacts, they find distinct regional signatures. The specific mix of trace elements in the copper, or the particular ratio of tin to copper, can act like a fingerprint pointing to a local ore source. This often supports the idea of independent development, as different cultures learn to work with the materials they had on hand. But then we find the outliers, the artifacts whose chemical signature is foreign, proving that the finished object, or perhaps the raw metal itself, traveled a great distance. This hints at a world where the knowledge of how to work metal could have been a trade secret, passed from one master smith to another at a crossroads of ancient trade routes. The most compelling argument for independent genius, however, comes from a metal that defied European understanding for centuries: platinum. In pre-Columbian Ecuador, metal workers from the Latolita culture were creating objects of breathtaking beauty from an alloy of gold and platinum. Platinum's incredibly high melting point made it impossible to work with old-world furnaces for millennia. Yet, the Latolita artisans developed a technique called sintering. They would meticulously mix tiny grains of platinum with gold dust, then heat the mixture to a temperature that allowed the grains to fuse together without fully melting, creating a strong, durable composite material. This was a technological leap that Europe would not achieve until the 19th century. The presence of such an advanced, localized technology strongly suggests that at least some metallurgical knowledge was born from unique regional experimentation, a brilliant solution to a local material challenge. The global map of metalworking, therefore, is not a simple story of one point of origin. It is a complex tapestry of independent discovery and long-distance transmission. Some skills, like basic copper smelting, may have been invented multiple times by cultures reaching a certain level of pyrotechnical skill. Other, more specific alloy recipes or casting techniques could have been precious cargo, carried along the same networks that moved obsidian and shells. The silent, shimmering evidence of ancient metal asks us to consider a world where a master smith's most guarded secrets could, over generations, travel from one end of a continent to the other, connecting distant fires in a shared pursuit of transforming stone into power and art. A piece of fabric preserved for millennia in the dry air of a desert tomb, holds a story not just of the person who wore it, but of the mind that created it. The technology of turning plant fibers and animal hair into cloth is one of humanity's oldest and most vital inventions, and the patterns of its development are written across the globe in a language of thread and loom. From the high Andes of South America to the river valleys of ancient China, we find an astonishing convergence in textile technology. The backstrap loom, a simple yet brilliant device where one end of the warp threads is tied to a fixed post and the other to a belt around the weaver's own body, appears in both of these distant worlds. This specific tool allowed for the creation of complex, tightly woven fabrics, and its use produced textiles with nearly identical structural patterns, like the intricate double weave and tapestry techniques mastered by both Andean and Southeast Asian weavers thousands of years ago. How could such specific technical knowledge emerge on opposite sides of the greatest ocean on Earth? The fiber processing itself adds another layer to the mystery. In the Andes, the domestication of cotton and the use of camelid wool like alpaca and vicuña led to the production of vibrant, durable textiles. In ancient China, we see the parallel development of sericulture, the sophisticated process of harvesting and weaving silk from silkworms, alongside the use of hemp and ramie. These were different materials, but the underlying mechanical principles of spinning, plying, and dyeing were so similar that a master weaver from one culture could likely have understood the work of the other. The evidence for this parallel evolution is not just in the rare, preserved textiles found in places like the Paracas Peninsula in Peru or the Tarim Basin in China. Sometimes the ghost of a fabric is all that remains. On pottery fragments from both regions, archaeologists have found the clear impressions of woven cloth pressed into the wet clay before firing. These impressions reveal the same weave structures, the same thread counts, and sometimes even the same decorative techniques. This suggests that the knowledge was not just about making cloth for clothing, but about creating a specific, high-quality product that held cultural and possibly even ritual significance. So, are we looking at another case of independent genius where the human mind, faced with the universal need for protection and containers, logically arrived at the same set of solutions? The argument for independent invention is strong. The backstrap loom is in essence an incredibly efficient and portable solution. The need to create strong, decorative fabrics from available fibers would naturally lead to the discovery of similar spinning and weaving methods. This could be a perfect example of technological convergence, where similar problems yield similar solutions regardless of contact. Yet, the specificity of the techniques gives one pause. The intricate method of creating a particular kind of openwork weave, or the complex way of dyeing threads before weaving to create a specific pattern, feels less like a basic necessity and more like a shared recipe. This has led some researchers to cautiously revisit the possibility of very early, sporadic contact across the Pacific. Could a storm-blown boat from Asia have reached the South American coast, carrying with it a weaver and their loom, or could the exchange have happened in the opposite direction? The evidence is far from conclusive, but the very possibility forces us to expand our vision of the ancient world. These textile parallels weave a complex tapestry of their own. They present us with a world where the most intimate human technologies, the clothes on our backs and the bags in our hands, could either be the product of our shared, inventive DNA or the faded echoes of conversations held across impossible distances, their voices now silent, but their patterns forever preserved in thread. Our story of connection now moves from artifacts we can hold to a code written within our very cells. Recent breakthroughs in genetic science are allowing us to read this ancient manuscript, revealing a hidden chapter of human history written in DNA. The most startling revelation comes from a group known as the Denisovans, an elusive branch of the human family tree first identified from a single finger bone in a Siberian cave. We now know that our ancestors did not just meet these other kinds of humans, they had children with them. Today, traces of Denisovan's DNA persist in living populations, especially across Asia, Oceania, and the Americas. This is not a uniform legacy, however. The genetic map is a patchwork. Indigenous populations in Papua New Guinea and Australia carry one distinct set of Denisovan genes. Meanwhile, populations across mainland Asia and the Americas carry another, suggesting not one, but at least two separate waves of interbreeding with different Denisovan groups. This genetic evidence paints a picture of a far more complex prehistoric world than we ever imagined from stones and bones alone. It suggests that different bands of modern humans encountered different populations of these archaic cousins as they moved across the vastness of Asia, and that these encounters left unique genetic signatures that then traveled with their descendants to the farthest reaches of the globe. This is a ghostly map of population movements and interactions that left almost no other trace. The most powerful example of this genetic gift is found high on the Tibetan Plateau, one of the most challenging environments on Earth. The air there is so thin that lowlanders can become seriously ill from the lack of oxygen. Yet, Tibetan people thrive there. Scientists discovered that their remarkable adaptation to high altitude is linked to a specific gene that affects how their bodies use oxygen. And this gene, it turns out, is not a modern human innovation. It was inherited directly from the Denisovans. A fragment of DNA from an ancient, otherwise extinct human group provided the key to surviving in a harsh new land. This single finding changes everything. It demonstrates that interbreeding was not just a curious biological event. It was a vital source of genetic diversity and adaptation. Our ancestors did not simply replace other hominins they encountered. They absorbed them, weaving their strengths into our own biological fabric. This genetic evidence forces us to reinterpret the archaeological record. When we see similar artifacts or cultural practices appearing in distant locations, we can no longer assume they are purely independent inventions or the result of simple trade. They could be the echoes of these now invisible population movements, carried by people who themselves carried the legacy of Denisovans. The genes themselves become the ultimate artifact, the most durable evidence of contact, proving that our prehistoric world was a melting pot of different human forms, whose connections literally shaped who we are today. The same human hand, outlined in red ochre, presses against a rock wall in a cave in France. An almost identical stencil, created with the same spray pigment technique, appears on a sandstone overhang in Australia. And halfway across the world, in the caves of Patagonia, the same motif emerges from the stone. These hand stencils are a global phenomenon, a silent signature left by our ancestors on every continent they inhabited. But the parallels run far deeper than just the shape of a hand. From Europe to Africa to the Americas, ancient artists returned to the same limited palette of colors, primarily red and yellow ochre, black manganese or charcoal, and white chalk or clay. They employed the same methods, blowing pigment through a hollow tube to create stencils or using their fingers and simple brushes to paint. Even their subject matter overlaps in profound ways, focusing on the large animals they hunted, like bison and deer, and abstract symbols like dots, lines, and zigzags. How do we explain this global artistic consensus? One compelling answer lies within our own biology. The act of pressing a hand against a wall and spraying pigment around it is a powerful, direct way to leave a permanent mark of one's existence. It may be a universal human impulse, a primal form of "I was here." The recurring geometric shapes could be phosphenes, visual patterns generated by the human brain during trance states or migraines, meaning that early shamans or artists everywhere were simply painting the visions their own neurology provided. This theory of a shared mental template suggests that art was not an idea that spread, but a behavior that spontaneously ignited wherever humans lived. Yet, recent discoveries have dramatically complicated this elegant explanation. For decades, the magnificent cave art of Europe, like that in Chauvet and Lascaux, was considered the undisputed pinnacle of early human creativity, the birthplace of artistic genius. Then, in the limestone caves of Sulawesi, Indonesia, archaeologists found hand stencils and elaborate animal paintings. Using advanced dating techniques, they made a startling announcement. This Indonesian art was not a copy of the European tradition. It was just as old, dating back at least 45,000 years, and in some cases even older. This shatters the old diffusionist model that placed Europe at the center of the creative explosion. We now have two ancient, sophisticated artistic traditions developing simultaneously at opposite ends of the Eurasian landmass. So, were these two separate springs of the same creative water, or were they connected? The vast, cold steppes of Siberia and the Bering Land Bridge once formed a corridor between continents. Could small, mobile bands of people have carried the very concept of cave painting with them as they moved? A portable tradition of marking sacred spaces. The hand stencil is a simple, powerful idea that could easily survive such a journey. The alternative is even more profound. Perhaps the capacity for complex symbolic art is an innate part of being human, an ability that lay dormant in our species until we reached a certain cognitive threshold, and then it erupted independently and brilliantly in multiple corners of the globe at roughly the same time. These ancient galleries force us to choose between two incredible stories. Either our ancestors were connected by a fragile web of cultural exchange that stretched across thousands of miles of wilderness, or the human mind itself contains a universal artistic blueprint, a shared language of form and symbol that we were all born to speak. The painted walls of the world are waiting for us to decide. A spear is more than just a sharp point. It is a system, a carefully engineered solution to the problem of survival. When we look deep into the archaeological record, we find that our ancestors were not just making tools, they were inventing toolkits, and the blueprints for these kits show up in startlingly similar forms across the world. One of the most revolutionary inventions was the composite tool, where a handle or haft was combined with a sharp stone inset. The technique for attaching these pieces, using natural glues like birch tar or plant resins, and binding them with sinew or plant fibers, appears in ancient sites from Africa to Europe to Australia. This was not a single idea, but a whole system of thought, a way of thinking about technology in modular, more efficient parts. The consistency in these methods is what makes archaeologists pause. Were different cultures simply arriving at the same logical conclusion, or was this sophisticated knowledge being shared across vast distances? This pattern of parallel development becomes even more striking with the global distribution of microblades. These are tiny, razor-sharp flakes of stone, often no bigger than a fingernail, that were mass-produced from a carefully prepared core. From the frozen tundra of Siberia to the forests of North America and the plains of Europe, cultures during the Upper Paleolithic all began using these nearly identical microblades. Their purpose was ingenious. They were designed to be slotted into the sides of bone or wooden shafts, creating cutting edges for knives, spear points, or scrapers that could be easily replaced when one blade became dull. This is a highly specific technological solution. So, did every culture independently invent the exact same method for creating and using these miniature blades? One compelling argument points to the environment. As the last ice age gripped the planet, human groups were adapting to colder climates and hunting smaller, swifter game. The microblade technology was perfectly suited for this new reality, a logical adaptation that different societies could have easily discovered on their own. The similar environmental pressures sculpted not just the landscape, but the very tools in our ancestors' hands. Yet, some tools feel too unique to be mere coincidence. This brings us back to one of archaeology's most enduring mysteries, the curious resemblance between the Solutrean leaf points of southwestern Europe and the later Clovis points of North America. The Solutrean people from around 22,000 years ago crafted stunningly beautiful, thin, leaf-shaped spearheads. They used a master-level technique called overshot flaking, where a strike sends a flake across the entire face of the point, thinning it dramatically and creating a distinctive scalloped edge. Thousands of years later and thousands of miles away, the Clovis culture in North America produced points that are, in many ways, a mirror image. They are also large, bifacial, and thinned using what appears to be the same complex overshot flaking method, resulting in that same characteristic edge. The similarities are so technically nuanced that seeing them side by side is jarring. How could two cultures, separated by an ocean and millennia, develop not just the same general idea for a spear point, but the same intricate, difficult recipe for making it? The debate over these points forces us to confront the very nature of human innovation. The independent invention theory suggests that when faced with the same challenge of hunting large, thick-skinned game, the most skilled stoneworkers will logically converge on the most efficient design. The overshot flaking technique, while advanced, might simply be the best way to thin a large piece of stone, a solution waiting to be discovered by any culture that pushed their craft to its limits. The opposing view, however, finds the parallels too precise to dismiss. Could the same exact solution, with all its inherent risks and required skill, really be stumbled upon by chance twice? Some researchers point to the harsh Ice Age environment, suggesting that a frozen Atlantic, dotted with ice shelves, could have provided a brutal but possible coastal route for small bands of people. The idea that this specific knowledge could have been carried across such a bridge by a handful of intrepid explorers remains a controversial but tantalizing possibility. These silent stone points, lying in museums an ocean apart, challenge us to decide if we are looking at the ghost of a migration or a stunning testament to our shared human genius. The consistency in how prehistoric people solved complex problems opens a window onto a world that was either deeply interconnected or universally brilliant, and perhaps in the end it was both. The vast, empty ocean was not a barrier to our ancestors, but a pathway they learned to read. Across the globe, from the Pacific to the Mediterranean, ancient mariners developed a shared toolkit of navigational skills that seem impossibly advanced. They learned to steer by the stars, creating mental star compasses that mapped the heavens. They could feel the subtle shifts in ocean swells, interpreting the patterns of waves to sense the presence of distant, unseen islands. They watched the flight paths of birds, knowing that a certain species flying in a particular direction at dusk was heading toward land. These were not just simple tricks, they were complex, codified systems of knowledge, passed down through generations of master navigators. The most stunning proof of this capability comes from the Polynesians. Using only these natural signs without any compasses or charts, they settled the most remote islands on Earth, navigating a watery expanse larger than any continent. Their voyages across thousands of miles of open ocean were not accidents, they were deliberate acts of colonization, This raises a profound question. Were these identical skills invented independently by every seafaring culture, or does their similarity hint at a much older, shared heritage of maritime knowledge? The argument for independent invention is strong. Anyone spending enough time on the open sea would naturally begin to notice the same patterns, the same star that always sits in the north, the way specific birds behave near land, the feel of a current shifting. The human mind is brilliant at finding order in chaos, and the ocean presents the ultimate chaotic system to decode. It is logical that different cultures in different seas would eventually crack the same celestial and oceanic codes. Yet, the specific methods feel too much like a shared language. The Polynesian star compass, dividing the horizon into precise houses for each guiding star, is a concept that finds echoes in the practices of ancient Greek and Phoenician sailors. The ability to read the refraction of waves, to literally see the ghost of an island in the water long before it appears on the horizon, is a specialized art that feels less like a basic observation and more like a taught technique. Could this sophisticated understanding have been a piece of precious cargo, traded not in physical form, but through whispered lessons at rare meetings between different maritime peoples on some forgotten shore? The achievements of these ancient sailors force us to redraw our mental map of the prehistoric world. If the Polynesians could routinely traverse the Pacific, then the Mediterranean, the Indian Ocean, and the coastal waters of the Americas could have been just as connected. The ocean was not a wall at the edge of their world. It was a dynamic, liquid network. These navigational skills suggest that long before the age of exploration, our ancestors were already masters of the sea, capable of journeys that would challenge modern sailors even today. Their legacy is a challenge to our imagination, urging us to see the empty blue on the map not as a void, but as a web of ancient highways traveled by intrepid minds who could read the language of the waves and the stars. A story of a great flood sent by the gods to cleanse the world echoes from the ancient Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh to the Genesis narrative of the Bible, and remarkably, it surfaces again in the indigenous legends of the Americas and the creation myths of Australia. This is not an isolated tale. The hero's journey, a narrative of a figure who ventures into the unknown, faces trials and returns transformed, structures the epic of the Sumerian king Gilgamesh, the Greek adventures of Odysseus, and the sacred stories of Native American and Polynesian cultures. Even the very act of creation is described in hauntingly similar terms, with many traditions speaking of a primordial sea, a world egg, or gods who fashion humanity from clay. How is it that cultures who supposedly never met told such fundamentally similar stories? This global chorus of myth presents one of the most profound puzzles. Are these narratives evidence of a shared human psyche, or are they the fossilized remnants of stories that traveled with the first human migrations out of Africa, carried in the minds of our ancestors as they populated the globe? One school of thought points to the power of universal human experience. The flood myth could be a collective memory of the rapidly rising sea levels at the end of the last ice age, a traumatic event witnessed by coastal communities everywhere. The hero's journey might map onto universal rites of passage and the personal struggle for identity. The dragon or great serpent, a creature found in the mythologies of Europe, Asia, and the Americas, could symbolize a universal human fear of predators or a metaphor for the chaotic, untamed forces of nature. In this view, our common biology and shared experiences with the natural world naturally generated a common library of archetypes and plots. Yet, the specific details can be unnervingly consistent. Consider the dragon. In Mesoamerica, the feathered serpent god Quetzalcoatl is a central figure of creation and knowledge. In East Asia, dragons are powerful, serpentine beings associated with water and wisdom. In the ancient Near East, the chaos dragon Tiamat is slain to create the world. The parallels go beyond a general fear of snakes, touching on shared concepts of cosmic power and creation. This level of specificity has led some anthropologists to propose a different theory, that these core myths were part of the cultural baggage carried by the first humans who left Africa tens of thousands of years ago. As these populations splintered and spread across the continents, the stories evolved and adapted, but their foundational structures remained, like a family of languages all descending from a single ancestral tongue. The stories themselves became heirlooms passed down through countless generations. Later, as we have seen with the Lapita or the Obsidian traders, these mythological seeds could have been replanted through later cultural contacts, creating a complex web of shared belief that is now impossible to fully untangle. The myths of our ancestors are more than just entertaining tales. They are the deepest expressions of how they understood their place in the universe. Their startling consistency across the globe suggests that whether through the wiring of our brains or through ancient, whispered conversations, humanity has always been engaged in a single, grand, and collective act of storytelling. A human skull carefully shaped in infancy to create an elongated, sloping profile stares back from a museum case. This is not a deformity, but an intentional act, a parent's hands gently binding their child's head to forever mark them as part of a distinct community. This practice, known as cranial shaping, appears with a strange consistency across the ancient world. From the Maya of Central America to the Huns of Eurasia and certain cultures in ancient Peru, societies with no known contact independently pursued this same dramatic alteration of the human form. Parallels extend far beyond the skull. In Africa, archaeologists have uncovered skeletons from thousands of years ago with their front teeth deliberately filed into sharp points. Across the ocean, in pre-Columbian Mexico, skeletal remains show an almost identical pattern of dental modification. Even more striking is the practice of incisor avulsion, the ritual removal of the front teeth, which is found in ancient North African populations and half a world away among some early Native American groups. These are not simple, practical acts like pulling a rotten tooth. They are complex cultural performances etched directly onto the living body. The central question is as intimate as it is profound. Why would cultures separated by oceans and millennia decide that the ideal human form included a pointed tooth, a missing incisor, or an elongated head? One compelling answer lies in the universal language of social identity. Modifying the body is a powerful, permanent way to signal belonging. A shaped skull or a filed tooth instantly communicated membership in a specific tribe, a particular social class, or a unique religious group. It was a walking, talking identity card forged in childhood and carried for life. In a world without written records, your body was your resume. The argument for independent invention is strong here. Different societies grappling with the same fundamental human need to create, us and them, could have easily arrived at the same physical solution. The head is soft and malleable in infancy, making shaping possible. Teeth are visible every time someone speaks or smiles, making them a perfect canvas for social messaging. The similar environmental constraints of the human body could have channeled different cultures toward the same limited set of alterations. Yet, recent bioarchaeological studies are revealing patterns that are difficult to dismiss as pure coincidence. By meticulously analyzing skeletal remains across a region, scientists can now trace the spread of a specific style of dental modification, almost like tracking a fashion trend. In one study, a particular pattern of tooth filing that originated in a specific area of sub-Saharan Africa was found to have spread along known trade routes over centuries. This suggests that the aesthetic ideal itself was a form of cultural cargo, moving from community to community, adopted and adapted as it traveled. The practice was not just an idea, but a specific technical knowledge of how to perform the alterations safely and effectively. This knowledge would have been passed from one skilled practitioner to another, a secret art that moved with people. So, were these body modifications the result of a shared human instinct for marking identity, or were they the faded echoes of ancient conversations about beauty and belonging? The answer may lie in the specific combination of practices. If one culture shapes skulls and another files teeth, that could be independent. But when we find the same unique bundle of alterations, the same recipe for a modified body appearing in distant locations, the possibility of contact becomes harder to ignore. These intentional changes to the human form force us to look at our ancestors not as isolated tribes, but as people deeply concerned with the same things we are: identity, beauty, and the desire to belong to something larger than themselves. Whether through independent genius or shared knowledge, they were using their own flesh and bone to write a story of who they were, a story we are only now beginning to read. The stories written in stone and clay are now being confirmed by a new kind of text, one inscribed directly into human bone. Recent breakthroughs in ancient DNA analysis are letting us read this biological manuscript, and it is revealing a prehistoric world far more dynamic and interconnected than we ever deduced from artifacts alone. This genetic evidence is uncovering massive, previously invisible population movements that reshaped continents. One of the most significant stories written in our genes is the epic migration of pastoralists from the Eurasian steppe. Genetic data reveals that around 5,000 years ago, these nomadic people from the region north of the Black and Caspian Seas swept westward into Europe and eastward into South Asia. This was not a minor exchange, but a massive influx of people whose genetic signature dramatically altered the populations of both continents. For decades, archaeologists had seen the spread of specific cultural markers, like a type of pottery and specific burial mounds moving across Europe. They debated whether this represented the movement of ideas or the movement of people. The DNA provided a stunningly clear answer. It was people. The genetic legacy of the steppe pastoralists is now found in nearly every modern European population, proving that our map of prehistoric Europe needed a fundamental redraw. This genetic evidence does not always simply confirm the archaeological record, however. Sometimes it directly challenges it. In South Asia, the long-held theory was that Indo-European languages were brought by migrating people from the steppe. The genetic evidence confirmed a significant steppe ancestry in many South Asian groups, but the timing and the path of this migration were more complex than the old models suggested. The genes revealed a story of multiple waves of mixing between local populations and newcomers, a nuanced narrative of integration and change that a simple potsherd could never tell on its own. Perhaps the most humbling genetic discovery is the ghostly presence of other kinds of humans within us. We now know that our ancestors, as they moved out of Africa, did not simply replace other hominins like the Neanderthals of Europe and the Denisovans of Asia. They met them, lived alongside them, and had families with them. Today, most people of non-African descent carry a small but significant percentage of Neanderthal DNA in their genomes. This is not just a biological curiosity, it is a direct chemical proof of interaction. Even more astonishing is the legacy of the Denisovans, a group known only from a few fragmentary bones in Siberia. Their DNA lives on in modern populations across Asia and Oceania, and it provided a tangible genetic gift. Scientists discovered that Tibetan people's remarkable ability to thrive at high altitudes is linked to a specific gene they inherited from the Denisovans. A fragment of DNA from an ancient, otherwise extinct human group was the key to surviving in a harsh new environment. This changes everything. It demonstrates that interbreeding was a vital source of adaptation, weaving the strengths of other hominins into our own biological fabric. The silent evidence of our genes forces a complete reinterpretation of the past. When we see a similar artifact in two distant places, we can no longer assume it is purely an independent invention. It could be the echo of these now invisible population movements, carried by people who themselves carried the legacy of Neanderthals or Denisovans. The genes have become the ultimate artifact, the most durable evidence of connection, proving that our prehistoric world was a melting pot whose interactions literally shaped who we are today. The world our ancestors walked was not a static map, but a shifting stage set by the climate. Dramatic environmental changes did not just alter the landscape, they rewired the entire system of human connection, opening doors between worlds that had been sealed for millennia. These were the Great Migration Corridors, temporary highways carved by ice and rainfall that brought distant cultures face to face. The most famous of these is the Bering Land Bridge, a vast, grassy plain known as Beringia that connected Siberia to Alaska during the last ice age. For thousands of years, while massive ice sheets locked up ocean water, this land was exposed, creating a continent-sized gateway. It was not a barren ice sheet, but a fertile steppe teeming with game, a place where plants, animals, and humans could live and move. This was not a single one-way street, but a fluctuating zone of contact. As groups of people moved back and forth across this bridge, they were not just carrying their genetic code, they were carrying their entire cultural toolkit, their knowledge of stone working, their stories, and their survival strategies. The bridge was a cultural mixing chamber, a place where ideas from the heart of Asia could slowly filter into the Americas. But this phenomenon was not unique to the far north. On the other side of the world, the Sahara Desert underwent an equally radical transformation. For long periods, what is now the world's largest desert was a green Sahara, a lush landscape of grasslands, lakes, and rivers. This greening happened in cycles driven by shifts in the Earth's orbit that brought monsoons further north. During these wet phases, the Sahara became a vibrant corridor, not a barrier. Populations from sub-Saharan Africa could move north, and groups from the Mediterranean coast could move south, meeting in the middle. Rock art from this period shows a world of hippos, giraffes, and cattle herders, a testament to a climate that allowed for movement and interaction on a scale that is almost unimaginable today. It was along these green highways that technologies like pottery and the domestication of cattle likely spread, carried by people taking advantage of a temporarily hospitable world. Similarly, in Southeast Asia, sea levels over 300 feet lower than today's exposed the Sunda Shelf, connecting the islands of Indonesia into a single landmass called Sundaland. This vast, connected plain allowed for the free movement of people and animals from mainland Asia all the way to the edge of the continental shelf, nearly to Australia. This environmental change facilitated the rapid spread of early human populations and their technologies. When the climate shifted again and the ice melted, the seas rose, flooding these lowlands and isolating the populations that had settled on the newly formed islands. This isolation would lead to the incredible cultural diversity we see in the region today, but its very origin lies in a period of profound connection. Recent research using climate models and archaeological data is painting a detailed picture of this pulsing rhythm of human movement. It was not a steady, slow crawl, but a series of stops and starts, pulses of migration driven by windows of opportunity. A greening Sahara would open for 1,000 years, allowing a wave of interaction, then close again, isolating the groups that had moved. A land bridge would exist for millennia, then vanish beneath the waves, severing the connection but leaving a legacy in the genes and artifacts on both sides. Understanding these ancient climate corridors is the master key that unlocks the mystery of those strangely similar artifacts. A shared tool design or a common artistic symbol no longer needs to be explained by an impossible transoceanic voyage. Instead, we can see it as the echo of a meeting that happened in a now-vanished landscape, a conversation held in a green Sahara or on the windy plains of Beringia. The evidence of connection was not lost, it was simply submerged under rising seas or buried beneath the sands of a returning desert. These scattered clues from artifacts, genes, and myths are not isolated fragments. They are pieces of a single, vast puzzle, a prehistoric world humming with interaction. When we weave these different threads of evidence together, a far richer and more complex tapestry of human history emerges, one where the lines between independent invention and cultural connection become beautifully blurred. The genetic map of ancient population movements provides the skeleton for this story, revealing the massive, invisible migrations that carried people across continents. The artifacts, from obsidian tools to shell beads, then put flesh on those bones, showing us the tangible goods and ideas that traveled with them. The environmental evidence of green Saharas and exposed land bridges provides the stage upon which this entire drama unfolded, opening and closing corridors of contact that directed the flow of human history. Sometimes these different forms of evidence sing in perfect harmony. The spread of the Lapita people across the Pacific is perfectly mirrored by the spread of their distinct pottery and their Austronesian languages, a triple confirmation of a major cultural expansion. At other times, the evidence presents a fascinating contradiction. The megalithic structures of Europe, Africa, and Asia are so architecturally similar that they seem to scream connection. Yet their wildly different dates argue powerfully for multiple, independent births of the same monumental idea. This is not a failure of the evidence, but its deepest truth. It reveals that human history is not a simple choice between isolation and contact, but a constant, dynamic dance between the two. Our ancestors possessed an incredible capacity for independent genius, repeatedly inventing agriculture, pottery, and astronomy in their own separate cradles of civilization. Yet they were also inveterate networkers, traders, and explorers, quick to adopt a better tool, a powerful symbol, or a useful crop from their neighbors, near or far. This synthesis forces us to abandon the old, simplistic model of prehistory as a series of isolated culture pots, each bubbling away on its own. Instead, we must envision a world crisscrossed by faint but resilient threads of exchange, a global network of low-bandwidth communication that operated over millennia. A new symbol could take 1,000 years to travel from one continent to another, passed from hand to hand in a slow, cultural relay race. This interconnectedness does not diminish the creativity of our ancestors, it magnifies it. It suggests that innovation often happened not in solitude, but through a process of shared learning and adaptation. An invention in one region could become a catalyst for innovation in another, thousands of miles away. The true story of human progress may be less about isolated flashes of brilliance and more about the slow, collective lighting of a fuse across the entire human world. So what does this interconnected past mean for us today? It suggests that the desire to explore, to trade, and to connect is not a modern affliction, but a fundamental part of our human inheritance. Our prehistoric world was not a collection of lonely islands, but a single, sprawling continent of the mind, where ideas could and did travel impossible distances, shaping who we are in ways we are only just beginning to understand. The silent stones and scattered bones have spoken, and together they tell a story of a world in conversation. Our journey through the evidence reveals a prehistoric landscape humming with interaction, where ideas, technologies, and people moved across surprising distances long before the written word. The global echoes of the Venus figurines, the parallel ambitions of megalithic builders, and the ghostly genetic maps in our own DNA all point toward a reality far more complex than isolated tribes. These multiple, converging lines of evidence challenge the old, simplistic narrative of cultures developing in lonely solitude. Instead, they paint a picture of dynamic exchange, a slow but persistent pulse of connection that beat across continents. This was not a global village, but a global network of low-bandwidth communication, where a new symbol or tool might take 1,000 years to travel from one continent to another, passed along like a whisper in a generations-long game of telephone. As research continues with ever more sophisticated tools, each new discovery adds another vibrant thread to this emerging tapestry of global prehistory. A single potsherd, a carved shell bead, or the alignment of a standing stone is no longer just a clue to a single culture. It is a potential node in a vast, ancient web, a fragment of a conversation that spanned the known world. The next time you look at an ancient artifact in a museum, remember that you might be looking at a traveler. That object could hold clues not just to the hands that made it, but to the invisible pathways it journeyed along, connecting distant minds in a shared human story. I would love to hear which of these prehistoric connections you find most compelling, so feel free to share your thoughts in the comments.